It was 7:55 in the morning at Forward Operating Base, Ashford, and the air already carried the kind of heat that felt heavy against the skin. The hum of diesel generators filled the stillness, mixing with the faint scent of burnt coffee and dust that clung to everything inside the cinder block walls. Folding chairs lined the room in uneven rows, each one facing a faded map of the valley taped to a whiteboard. Rangers from the 75th Regiment sat quietly, their sleeves rolled up, not saying much. A few SEALs leaned against the back wall, checking their gear. The only other sound came from the soft metallic clicks of a rifle being cleaned near the corner. Staff Sergeant Emily Carter sat apart from the rest. Her Barrett M107A1 stretched across her lap, the matte black receiver gleaming faintly under the fluorescent lights. She moved with slow precision, wiping the bolt face and chamber like she had done it 1,000 times before. It was a ritual, not a task. Every pass of the cloth was measured, every movement smooth and controlled. She didn't talk. She didn't look up. This was her way of settling her breathing before a mission briefing, of tuning out the noise that never seemed to stop in a place like this. Outside, rotors whirred in the distance, probably a Black Hawk heading toward the perimeter. Inside, the room filled with the shuffle of boots as more men filed in. The low murmur of conversation quieted when a cluster of officers stepped through the door. At the center of them was Rear Admiral Philip Grant, the commander of the Joint Task Force, his khaki uniform pressed to perfection, silver stars on his collar. His boots looked too clean for the desert. His eyes swept across the room, calculating, assessing, the kind of look that made everyone straighten a little. Then he saw her. He slowed, his gaze lingering on the rifle laid across her knees. The faintest smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth as he spoke loud enough for the entire room to hear. So this is who they're calling the best shot on base. You sure that thing doesn't weigh more than you? Sergeant, the air tightened. No one laughed. The kind of silence that comes when respect collides with rank filled the room. Emily didn't move. She just set the cleaning cloth aside and checked the bolt again. Her focus unbroken. Chief Warrant Officer Torres, standing near the projector, spoke carefully. Sir, Staff Sergeant Carter holds the range record, 2,000 yards confirmed. Grant waved a hand. Dismissive. Records don't win wars. Chief, instinct does. Then he stepped closer and reached for the rifle. His hand closed around the barrel as if he were testing the weight of it. The sound of metal shifting echoed through the room like a warning. Every ranger and SEAL froze. Everyone knew you never touched another sniper's rifle. Not one that was zeroed. Not without permission. It wasn't written anywhere. But it was sacred. Emily finally looked up. Her voice was calm. Her tone even. Sir, with respect, hands off my rifle. It's zeroed for my profile. Grant's expression didn't change, but his hand hesitated. For a moment, no one breathed. Then he let go, the rifle settling back into place on her lap. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. We'll see how steady those hands are under pressure. Sergeant, maybe you can show us what all the talk is about. Emily nodded once. The smallest of acknowledgments. She didn't rise to the challenge. Didn't argue. She only picked up the cloth again and wiped the barrel. The same motion as before. Calm and precise. The sound of the cloth moving against steel was the only thing that filled the silence now. Somewhere deep inside that silence, a line had been crossed. And though no one said it aloud, everyone in the room felt it. Sheridan, Wyoming, sat between low hills and long stretches of wind-beaten land that never seemed to end. It was the kind of place where the sky looked bigger than it should, where fences leaned tired against the wind and old trucks sat half-buried in dust. Emily Carter grew up there, in a house that smelled like coffee and gun oil, with her grandfather's voice as quiet and steady as the plains themselves. Viktor Kovalenko had served in Vietnam, a ranger marksman who never talked much about what he saw. He didn't tell stories about war. He just kept his Remington 700 inches, a wooden case behind the door, and treated it with the kind of respect most people reserved for church. He started teaching her when she was 8. They would drive out past the town limits before sunrise. The truck rattling down dirt roads while the world was still pale with morning light. He never gave her long speeches or corrected her much. He just set the rifle on a sandbag, adjusted the scope, and let her feel the weight of it. She learned the rest by watching how he placed his cheek against the stock, how his breathing slowed until it matched the wind, how he waited, patient and silent, until everything in the world felt still. The first time she pulled the trigger, the recoil startled her. The shot echoed across the open field, fading into nothing. He didn't say good job or try again. He only nodded once and pointed toward the target. The hole was a little high, but it was clean. After that, she wanted to chase that silence again. The space between the shot and the echo where everything felt right. Her father, a former Marine who had spent his youth inside an AAV-7 during Desert Storm, never liked it much. He told her shooting wasn't a life. It was a hobby, something to outgrow when she found something safer. But she kept going with her grandfather every weekend. Even when the wind turned sharp and the snow covered the prairie grass. Out there, time didn't move fast. It taught her patience, and patience became part of her. By the time she was 16, she could hit a tin can at 500 yards without missing twice. Victor didn't praise her. Not in words. He would just hand her the rifle back and say, again. That was all she ever needed. When she turned 18 and said she was joining the army, her father didn't argue. But he didn't smile either. He just helped her load her bag in the truck and closed the door. Her grandfather stayed on the porch. He didn't tell her to be careful or to make him proud. He only reached into his pocket and handed her the old rifle cloth, frayed from years of use. "Keep it clean," he said. Voice quiet as the wind that rolled through the grass. She didn't need to ask what he meant. The cloth wasn't just for the rifle. It was a reminder. Discipline, respect, and silence were her inheritance. Fort Moore greeted her with heat, humidity, and the kind of red clay that stuck to everything. It was 5 in the morning when the training day started. Though nobody ever said the hour out loud, it was just the rhythm of the course. Boots hit the ground. Rucks slammed against shoulders. And the sound of labored breathing mixed with the hum of cicadas. The Army sniper course was not about comfort. It was about control. Emily Carter learned that fast. She was the only woman in her class. Nobody said anything outright. But the glances were there. Quiet and measuring. She felt it in the way the instructors checked her equipment twice. In the way some of the men waited to see if she would fail before they called her by name. She didn't blame them. She just worked harder. Every morning started with a 6-mile ruck march uphill. 50 pounds on her back, and sweat already soaking through her uniform before the sun cleared the trees. Then came the obstacle drills. Crawling under barbed wire through mud that never quite came off the skin. And finally, the long days on the range. At first, the instructors ran them through the basics again. Range estimation, target detection, wind calls. Nothing Emily hadn't practiced before. But here, precision was everything. A single error in a wind formula could mean a missed shot, and a missed shot meant starting over. She kept a notebook tucked inside her sleeve pocket, recording every correction, every mistake. Her dope sheets filled fast with numbers and hand-drawn wind charts. The training cycled through different weapons. The Mach 13 Mod 7 for mid-range accuracy, the M2010 ESR for variable elevation shooting. She performed well with both, but it was the Barrett M107A, one that felt right. The weight was punishing, but she liked the honesty of it. There was no faking control with a .50 caliber rifle. You either mastered it, or it mastered you. The recoil didn't intimidate her. It taught her rhythm during live-fire drills. She focused on the basics, Trigger squeeze. Breathing. Sight picture. Follow-through. One instructor, a master sergeant with a combat action badge and years in Afghanistan, stood behind her one afternoon after a long exercise. When her shot broke clean and the steel rang almost a mile away, he said quietly that her trigger pull was the cleanest he'd seen in 15 years. She didn't respond. She just chambered the next round. Compliments didn't count toward qualification. The nights were worse than the days. By the time chow ended, most of the class fell asleep before lights out. Emily stayed up under the dim light of her headlamp, cleaning her rifle, checking her data, memorizing her dope cards until her eyes blurred. Her hands moved automatically, oiling the bolt, checking the chamber. It wasn't about nerves. It was ritual, like her grandfather had taught her. By the end of the course, she stopped hearing the jokes. The instructors no longer double-checked her logs. They started using her data to calibrate the others' shots. When graduation came, her name was called first. She stood straight, her uniform still dusty from the last range exercise. The battalion commander handed her the certificate with a firm handshake. No speech, no applause, just a nod that meant everything. She returned the nod, tucked the paper under her arm, and walked off the platform. There was no celebration waiting, and she didn't need one. She had already earned what mattered: respect, precision, and silence. The room had gone silent after Rear Admiral Philip Grant's challenge, but the tension stayed behind, like static in the air. The Rangers and SEALs sat still, not sure whether to look at him or at the woman he had just mocked. The overhead lights hummed softly, the only sound beside the faint rattle of the air conditioner working too hard. Emily Carter didn't move. She kept her hands on the Barrett M107A1, resting across the table. The same rifle she had cleaned earlier. Its black surface, catching the dull light. Grant's boots clicked against the concrete as he circled closer. His rank gave him the right to command the room, but at that moment, every man present knew he had already crossed a line that authority couldn't excuse. Grant stopped beside the table and lifted the rifle again. He tested its weight like a toy, rolling it in his hands as if he were evaluating its balance. "Not bad," he said casually, his voice carrying just enough volume to fill the room. "Feels heavy. Probably too much gun for a sergeant." The way he said it made the silence heavier. No one laughed. One ranger shifted in his chair, the scrape of metal against concrete breaking the stillness for half a second before everything froze again. Emily's expression didn't change. Her posture was exact. Chin level, shoulders square. Her voice, when it came, was calm and precise. "Sir, please set the weapon down. It's not calibrated for you." Her tone wasn't angry or defensive. It was procedural, professional, like any other safety correction. But to the operators in the room, it carried the weight of warning. Grant ignored her. He adjusted his grip again, placing one hand near the receiver, the other just below the muzzle. He tilted it slightly, pretending to sight the length of the barrel. "You know, Sergeant," he said, "I've seen a lot of shooters who depend too much on their optics. You trust the scope more than your own instincts, and you start to forget what real skill looks like." That was when she moved. No sudden motion, no flash of aggression, just efficiency. Her right foot stepped forward, shifting her balance. Her left hand came up, catching his wrist near the joint. Her thumb pressed into the radial nerve, while her shoulder turned into the movement. A half second of torque and control, enough leverage to force his hand open. The rifle slipped from his grip and landed on the table with a soft thud. The Admiral dropped to one knee, eyes wide, his face turning pale from the sharp pulse of pain shooting through his arm. The room didn't breathe. Every man in it had trained for combat, but none had ever seen something like this happen between a junior NCO and a flag officer. Emily held the pressure for only a heartbeat before releasing him. Grant stayed down for a moment, clutching his wrist. Not injured but humiliated. Emily stepped back to her position, standing at attention. Her voice stayed low and steady. "Sir, give me 6 targets. Any distance. Any time. If I miss one, I'll pack my gear and request reassignment." No one spoke. The sound of the air conditioner came back into focus, buzzing faintly above them. Grant's jaw tightened as he stood, his pride forcing him upright more than his strength. His face stayed stiff, eyes locked on her. "Fine," he said, the words sharp like a blade. "You'll get your 6. The silence that followed felt endless. A few glances traded across the room, the kind soldiers use when they know something has just shifted but can't quite say it. A ranger at the back leaned toward his teammate, whispering just loud enough for the words to travel. "This'll spread through the base by noon." Grant turned away, straightening his uniform, pretending to resume the briefing. But everyone knew the meeting was over. Emily stood still, eyes forward, her expression unreadable. In that quiet, respect began to realign itself, not through rank or authority, but through control, precision, and the kind of courage that didn't need to raise its voice. It was 10:20 in the morning when the heat began to settle over Range 14 like a curtain. The air shimmered above the dirt berms, dry and sharp, with the metallic scent of spent brass. A low hum of anticipation carried through the small crowd gathered along the perimeter. Rangers in tan uniforms, SEALs in dark fatigues, and a few Air Force JTACs stood shoulder to shoulder, silent and waiting. None of them had been ordered to be there, but word had spread fast. Rear Admiral Philip Grant stood off to the side with his right hand bandaged, his jaw tight, his pride bruised far worse than the skin beneath the wrap. Every set of eyes was fixed on the prone figure stretched out on a sand-colored mat near the firing line. Staff Sergeant Emily Carter lay still behind her, Barrett M107A1, the weapon resting on its bipod like an extension of her own body. She worked methodically, her movements quiet and deliberate. She adjusted the Schmidt and Bender PM2 scope, confirming 0 with a slow rotation of the elevation turret. Her cheek settled into the same position it always did, pressed firm but comfortable against the stock. The rifle's weight was familiar, grounding. To her left, Sergeant Owens knelt behind the spotting scope, his rangefinder clipped to his vest. He called out distances in a low voice, one after another. 800 meters, 1,000, 1,200, 1,400, 1,600, 1,810. His tone was steady, the cadence professional, but even he felt the weight of what this meant. Emily flipped open her laminated dope sheet and checked her handwritten notes. She adjusted her kestrel, noting the crosswind at 13 knots from the northwest, gusting just enough to make every shot a lesson in patience. Temperature, barometric pressure, air density all logged, all processed. Her breathing slowed as she ran through the numbers in her head, calculating the corrections without hesitation. Each click of the scope echoed faintly in the quiet. Marking distance, elevation, wind drift. She didn't think about the crowd, or the admiral standing behind her. She thought about her grandfather's voice, telling her to listen to the wind, not fight it. She chambered the first round. The bolt slid forward with a smooth metallic sound. The first target stood at 800 meters. She took a breath, let half of it out, and squeezed. The shot cracked like thunder. Half a second later, the steel plate rang with a clean, hollow note. She cycled the bolt, slow and measured. 1,000 meters. The mirage began to dance across the valley, twisting the air like glass. She held a half-mil right for wind. The round hit center mass, another clean impact. 1,200. The light shifted. The wind tugged harder from her 9 o'clock. She adjusted one click up, a 1/4 mil left. The plate rocked again. She barely blinked. 1,400. The heat made the air move in waves now. the shimmer bending her view through the scope. She read the pattern in the dust. Adjusted elevation. And squeezed. The sound took longer to return. But it came. 1600. The wind pushed strong and erratic. She waited. Not seconds, but long enough to feel the change. The gust eased slightly. She exhaled. And the shot dropped the steel right through the shoulder mark. The last target sat at 1810 meters. The farthest edge of the Barrett's comfort zone. The air went still. Even the crowd seemed to hold its breath. Emily adjusted elevation. 4.2 mils up. Wind hold 3 right. Her finger found the trigger. Slow pressure building until the break. The rifle bucked hard. Recoil pulsing through her shoulder. Then silence. 1 second. 2. 3. The sound of steel rang out deep and final across the valley. No one moved. The echo faded into the wind. Emily cleared the chamber, ejected the last shell, and set the Barrett down gently. Sergeant Owens looked up from his scope and gave a single nod. All 6 hits. Rear Admiral Grant stepped forward. His boots crunching on the dirt, the operators parted quietly as he walked toward her. He stopped beside the shooting mat. His left hand came up in a slow, "Deliberate salute," his voice. When he spoke, carried clearly across the range. "Staff Sergeant Carter, I was wrong." She stood, dust clinging to her sleeves, and returned the salute without a word. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then the wind came back through the valley, carrying the faint ring of the last shot with it. It sounded less like victory and more like balance being restored. Dawn came quietly to the mountains of northern Kurdistan. The mist clung low to the rocks, thin and pale, wrapping the valleys like smoke from a dying fire. Below, the faint hum of rotor blades faded into the distance as the insertion team completed their drop. The radio on Emily Carter's vest crackled softly, the clipped rhythm of call signs and coordinates whispering through her earpiece. It was 0530 when Operation Dawnlight began. She lay prone in a camouflaged hide, dug into the ridge. The netting around her dusted with sand and bits of brush. The Barrett M107A1 rested on its bipod, the stock snug against her shoulder. The scope dialed for the low light. Her kestrel read wind 5 knots out of the west. She adjusted a 1/4 mil right and took one slow breath. Through the scope, the world narrowed to a single valley and a handful of moving silhouettes. Below her, a platoon of rangers and a small SEAL element advanced through the defile. Careful, methodical, rifles raised. Her job was to see everything before it saw them. Sergeant Owen's voice came through the radio, steady and low. 3 sentries on the ridgeline. Left side, 900 out. Emily shifted her aim. The crosshairs floating over the first target. He leaned against a rock, scanning lazily with binoculars. She adjusted half a click for drop and squeezed. The rifle cracked. Recoil, pushing into her shoulder. The sentry dropped without a sound. She moved to the second, then the third. Each shot came slower, more deliberate. Wind, breathing, trigger, impact. Minutes stretched into an hour. The valley stayed quiet. Her comms filled with quiet acknowledgments from the teams below, voices steady, professional. When the next call came, her pulse didn't change. Moving patrol. 2 targets. Rooftop. 1,200 meters. She exhaled, letting her heart rate fall between beats. 2 rounds. 2 confirmations. Then the light shifted. A glint from glass flashed near a crumbled tower. Her instincts tightened before the radio even spoke. Possible overwatch. She adjusted elevation and held a breath. The enemy sniper leaned out just enough to catch her position through his scope. He never finished the motion. Her round struck first, sending him backward out of sight. The mission ended at 0640. 6 high-value targets captured. No friendly casualties. Her final report transmitted without embellishment. just data and coordinates. Later that week, in a quiet office back at base, Rear Admiral Philip Grant signed off on the after-action review. He paused over her name, then added a short, handwritten note under the Silver Star recommendation for precision, courage, and restraint. 2 weeks later, the medal was pinned to her uniform at Fort Liberty. The morning sun hit the formation lines, boots polished, rifles slung, the air thick with the smell of dust and starch. When her name was called, she stepped forward, stood at attention, and accepted the medal with a single nod. No applause followed. No words were spoken. The moment was quiet, the kind that didn't need sound to matter. She looked ahead, calm, already thinking about the next mission. The ceremony ended, the wind moved across the field, and the world kept going, just as it always had. The light in the old farmhouse came in soft and golden, spilling across the wooden floorboards like the last breath of the day. The air was still, carrying the faint scent of oil and old pine. On the kitchen table, 2 badges rested side by side. Her grandfather's worn ranger tab, edges dulled with time, and her own silver star. The medal catching the sunlight in quiet flashes. Emily sat alone, her uniform jacket folded neatly over the chair. She reached for the faded cleaning cloth her grandfather had once given her, its fabric thin from years of use. Her movements were unhurried as she wiped both badges, the cloth gliding over the metal with the same care she'd once used on her rifle. Outside, the Wyoming wind brushed against the windows, soft but constant, the same sound she'd grown up hearing on the range. She listened for a moment and smiled, realizing the wind had never really left. It had simply carried their legacy forward. 2 hearts, bound by silence, precision, and the kind of strength that doesn't need words